When the last bell tolled over a fallen monastery, it was not the monks who faced true terror. It was the women, those who had devoted their lives to prayer and silence, who now stood at the edge of unimaginable horror. Death might have been a mercy compared to what awaited them, and yet, history often stays silent, even when it should scream. What the Vikings did to Christian nuns was not mere brutality. It was calculated, methodical, and designed to erase the sacred itself. This is a story of faith confronted by cruelty, of sanctuaries transformed into cages, of devotion exploited and destroyed. It is a chapter of history rarely spoken aloud because it challenges our understanding of honor, of law, and even of religion. The nuns who survived raids did not survive in peace, they survived in terror, in forced obedience, and in systems built to strip them of every choice. Across northern Europe and the British Isles, Viking raids left more than burned walls and dead warriors. They left scars in human lives, silent, enduring, and meticulously recorded in soil, bones, and inscriptions long after the scribes had stopped writing. To understand what happened, we must listen to the evidence buried in archaeology, the faint traces of human suffering that even the most detailed chronicles chose to ignore. Let us return to the year 845. The monastery at Clonmacnoise fell to the fleet of Thorgest. 43 monks were slain defending the altar. Chroniclers recorded the dead in black ink, then stopped. They said nothing of the women and nuns who had taken vows to live and die in service of God. Yet the earth remembers. Excavations in Dublin reveal the stark reality: iron shackles sized for slender wrists, ankle rings barely wider than a child's, warehouse foundations constructed to confine living bodies. These were not prisons of punishment, they were human processing facilities. The Dublin Vikings did not raid solely for gold or relics, they raided for flesh. Records from Schleswig carved into stone, the runic inscriptions, reveal the chilling calculations of commerce: 20 silver pieces for a young nun, 15 for an older sister, 10 if she had been wounded during the raid. This was pricing, not punishment. The nuns were inventory, their sacred vows transformed into profit. Being sold was often the merciful outcome. Archaeology tells us what the chronicles refused to record. In 862, Vikings sacked the monastery at Portmaro. 47 warriors died in combat, but the fate of the nuns is found not in text, but in soil. 23 female bodies discovered in nearby bogs show repeated blunt force trauma, shattered ribs, and defensive wounds. These were not deaths in battle, they were ritualized killings, methodical, deliberate, occurring after surrender. Viking war culture followed a grim set of rules. Women captured in battle were declared Konarana, owned women. Their status as human beings or spiritual devotees was irrelevant. Under the Grágás law codes of Iceland, ownership had to be announced publicly. Resistance was meaningless. If a woman took her own life to avoid captivity, her captor could demand compensation. Her death was property theft, not tragedy. The cycle repeated. In 878, the monastery of Bangor fell. Archaeological layers reveal female bones arranged in ceremonial patterns, the remnants of ritual sacrifice agreement sent out for the warriors who believed death required offerings. Ibn Fedlin, a historian of Norse culture, documented similar practices in 921. Girls drugged, strangled, and sacrificed in carefully orchestrated ceremonies. These acts were not random, they were a form of systemic terror. By the 9th century, Viking slave markets were sophisticated. Dublin, Hedby, and Jvik served as human processing hubs. Captured nuns were categorized, priced, and shipped along trade routes spanning from Scandinavia to Baghdad. Some ships carried as many as 80 living captives, held below deck with ventilation shafts, water storage, and reinforced chains. Burn marks on wrecked vessels confirm that hundreds perished at sea, chained together like cargo. The worst fates were reserved for the defiant. Excavations reveal execution pits, shallow and narrow, constructed to prolong suffering, legs broken to prevent escape, arms shattered to prevent resistance. Victims died slowly from exposure, starvation, or thirst, sometimes over weeks. Others were forced to watch, a spectacle of obedience enforced by terror. Even during periods of peace, Viking slave networks did not collapse, they evolved. Trade routes became organized, mobile slave markets were deployed alongside armies, and treaties guaranteed delivery of human cargo. These were not isolated incidents, they were systematic, legal, and profitable. Viking law meticulously codified the ownership of nuns and other female captives. The Grágás code required public declaration of possession. Women were property, their resistance irrelevant. Children born from captivity were property as well. Those who could not serve their captors were often executed. These laws codified terror, turning violence into routine administration. Christian authorities, far from dismantling these systems, often absorbed them. By the 10th century, English and Norman kings inherited Viking infrastructures, using them to regulate and tax human labor. Royal records list duties on nuns and children as if they were commodities, proof that cruelty became normalized, embedded within society, and even sanctified by law. The numbers are staggering. Excavations at Repton, a Viking army camp from 873 to 874, unearthed 249 skeletons, only 63 female. Isotope studies revealed that these women came from Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, dragged from monasteries and sold far from home. The lucky ones died giving birth. The rest vanished into the network of slavery. Facilities in York reveal even darker truths. 6 to 4 individual stone cells, carbonated to 876 CE, were used continuously for decades to confine nuns. Chains embedded in walls, bone fragments of repeated pregnancies, and baptisms of children born within these cells all testify to a horrifying system of reproductive exploitation. Only a handful of children survived past infancy. These foundlings were then sold, funding churches built upon their mother's suffering. Even the executed nuns faced cruelty beyond death. Soil samples show slow poisoning, causing prolonged madness before death. Mothers and children were eliminated together to erase their lineage and testimony. Knowledge itself was a crime. Nuns who witnessed or recorded atrocities were systematically silenced. Despite this horror, not all nuns submitted. Records of a woman named Gunnhild survive in the Frankish chronicles. Once enslaved herself, she became an agent of vengeance, leading raids to burn Viking camps and free captive nuns. Her methods mirrored the brutality of her oppressors: precision strikes, ambushes, and relentless enforcement. Her story is a rare testament to defiance, a reminder that even in despair, the human spirit can resist the machinery of cruelty. Resistance was recorded in fragments, broken shackles, crushed bones, rosary beads buried in mud. The evidence is faint but undeniable. Faith and defiance, even against insurmountable odds, persisted. By the 11th century, the practices pioneered by Viking raiders were mirrored in Norman England. Captured nuns were legally considered property, used to legitimize land transfers, or forced into unions with knights. Monastic records reflect a sharp rise in trauma-related suicides, sanctified as martyrdom by the church to mask the scale of despair. Genetic research confirms the enduring impact. DNA analyses reveal that modern Icelandic populations carry roughly 60% Celtic female ancestry, while Norwegians carry 40% from the British Isles. Each statistic represents stolen lives, captured nuns, forced births, and systematic sexual violence across centuries. Imagine the nuns confined in stone cells, chained to walls, forced into repeated pregnancies, witnessing friends die slowly or disappear into markets. Imagine faith, the very foundation of life, weaponized against you. These women lived in constant tension between obedience and survival, their inner world fractured by terror. Even those who survived bore scars invisible to history. Trauma shaped societies, laws, and economies. Human suffering was monetized, ritualized, and normalized. The line between captivity, legality, and faith blurred, leaving an entire class of women trapped in a liminal space between life and exploitation. History often celebrates conquest, but it seldom accounts for the silent victims, the sacred women who suffered quietly. Systematically, across centuries, Christian nuns, devoted to God, became the machinery of commerce, of ritual, of terror, their names largely lost, their voices mostly erased. They endured horrors that made death itself a mercy. Yet their entrance, however invisible, remains. Archaeology preserves fragments of their lives. Bones, soil, inscriptions, and artifacts whisper their story. In remembering them, we confront the darkest realities of human power, the fragility of faith, and the extraordinary capacity for resilience in the face of cruelty. We cannot bring back the lost, but we can honor their existence. The nuns of history were witnesses to horror, prisoners of law and custom, yet even in their suffering, they testified to the enduring strength of the human spirit.